I can very, very clearly remember walking in on my very first day, and I saw these amazing 3D printers.
This is Bridget Smith. She's the Assistant General Counsel and Director of Intellectual Property at Relativity Space, an aerospace company that has printed and launched the world's first 3D printed rocket named Terran 1.
I'm looking at these 3D printers, and I'm looking at a half-built Terran 1, and I was thinking, oh my God, these people just built a rocket out of dust and wires. Like, really let that sink in. And thinking, wow, they're already almost done with this rocket, and none of that is captured. And how do I capture that really, really efficiently and effectively?
Bridget started at Relativity Space in 2022 as the company's first head of IP, and she was responsible for developing and executing the company's IP strategy.
And one of the big things that wasn't in my original 5-year plan, is it possible to do like a trade secret registry? And at Relativity, when you're like a scrappy startup, they're like, why not? You tell us.
Welcome to Clause 8, presented by TradeSpace, a revolutionary end-to-end AI-powered IP management platform that helps companies unlock the value of their IP. If you enjoy hearing from people like Bridget, please take a minute to subscribe on clause8podcast.com. It really goes a long way for us, and plus, you never miss an episode. In today's episode, Bridget shares how she went from being one of the country's top PTAB practitioners to becoming the first head of IP at Relativity Space, where she's implementing an innovative, some might say controversial, approach with having a trade secret registry for the company. And now, here's your host, Eli Mauser.
First of all, thank you for joining Clause 8. But I was going to start with, Bridget, anybody who's involved in the IP world, they've probably seen or read something by you or seen something from you in every possible organization, IP organization I think there is. How is one person able to do that all and have your law firm practice and now lead IP at a company like Relativity Space? Like, what is your secret?
I don't sleep. I don't sleep ever. No, I'm joking. I actually sleep really well. It's just that I have a lot of caffeine going through my blood at any given moment. But I'm just a very excited, passionate person. I love being an IP lawyer. I'm proud to be an IP lawyer. And so I like to give back to the community however I can.
You know, you started a law firm, and I think when the PTAB was created, you started practicing doing PTAB work. Take us back to that time. How did that happen? And do you have any advice for others at a law firm kind of trying to figure out what will be my niche? What can I get really good at?
Yeah. So after I graduated from law school, I joined Kenobi Martins as an associate. And one of my first projects there was to work on a big set of sprawling re-exams ahead of a patent litigation that was coming down the pike. So, of course, I said yes, because that's what associates do. They say, thank you for the opportunity, and they say yes. And that early experience on those re-exams put me in a position where I started working on a lot of re-exams because I knew a thing or two about them. And because of that experience, when the AIA was passed, I was seen as just one of the natural go-to people at the firm for the new IPRs because people perceived them as being very similar to the old re-exams. And anytime there was a chance to raise my hand and talk to my partners, associates, practice groups, whatever, about what is the AIA and what should I expect from it as far as PTAB trials go, I was always raise my hand. So I started working on those from the very earliest days of those proceedings. In fact, I'm very proud to say that I scored one of the earliest across the board wins for a patent owner way back in the patent death squad days. You probably remember that terminology that was called, it was a little maybe hyperbole, but that's what it was called. Yeah. And I built up that experience, and I eventually became a partner and a co-chair of Kenobi's PTAB trial committee. This was like fast-moving depositions, written advocacy, almost like motions for summary judgment, and actually getting that oral hearing, which is a trial-like atmosphere. So when I was at Kenobi, I was mixing PTAB work with a lot of transactional client counseling and in varying amounts, some litigation. But then I was offered this opportunity to really lean in and do this work that I found so exciting and fulfilling. And that was full-time at Lowenstein and Weatherwax. I came over as a partner there. And after a short time at Lowenstein and Weatherwax, I became one of the 100 most active PTAB practitioners in the country and one of the 10 most active attorneys representing patent owners. And I think there were only like 7 women on the list of 100. So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, I remember that time, I guess, when the AIA was passed and you'd be at these big conferences and everybody was like, well, it's probably bad for the patent system, but it's good for attorneys. And it's funny because you said it was this death squad days. And at least now that I talk to people who do litigation, said there was a lot of denial in the beginning. Yeah, PTAB seems like a big thing, but litigations are going to go back to what they were before. It's not going to have that big of an impact in the litigation practice. I guess from your vantage point, you were the youngest, but probably one of the leading experts at your old firm for PTAB. What was that experience like for you?
Invaluable. And it really taught me the benefit of branding and marketing myself. And then just using it to grow that practice and become the person that I always knew that I could be. I did get that sense of uncertainty and is this going to change things? Is this not going to change things? Is this going to become a big thing? I would actually argue that it did become a big thing. It continues to be. It's definitely adding a lot of expense and complexity to the process. And I think my experience.
Well, the district court litigation practice probably, it took some of the air out of that, but obviously the PTAB practice.
It did. And I think it's great for, even within a firm with as many IP attorneys as Kenobi had, there was still room to create your niche and leverage it and keep digging in and reminding people that I am a go-to trustworthy resource to learn more about this practice and just being a resource for your firm. And I think that's a good thing for any attorney that's relatively junior in their career, and just being of service to the partners and then continuing to be of service as your career matures.
All right, so now we'll get to the main topic, which is became the first head of IP at Relativity Space. So you were one of the top PTAB experts. The practice is rising. Everybody wants to become you, and then you give it all up to become to go in-house. Can you tell us about that part of the journey?
Yeah, I have a history of making really bad decisions and torpedoing my own career. But at least, you know what, I'll have a fun story to tell at the end when it's all done. So taking a huge step back, like a lot of patent lawyers, I took a really meandering path to become one. And I started my career at Motorola Semiconductor. I was there for a few years. I was working in the fab in a bunny suit. I had this really cool opportunity to join a startup. And it was doing something that was somewhat on the periphery of what I was doing at Motorola Semiconductor in an entirely different atmosphere. So it was with business software, not semiconductors at all, but it was using those same principles. And gosh, I really liked working at a startup. Like, it was messy, it was scrappy. I was working in a repurposed reception desk, I think, with 4 other people. And it was a really exciting environment. That was the first time I'd ever seen a patent. That was the very first time I'd ever seen a patent in my whole life, is when I was interviewing for that job with that startup. And I saw it. I literally had no idea what a patent was. I thought that you're probably going to laugh at this, but I actually thought that patents were like an award that the government gave you for being a smart person, like a Nobel Prize, but like an American Nobel Prize, and which seems silly, but I was young and I didn't know. And I saw this and I was like, oh, this is really amazing. Did they really tell like the whole world how their technology works? And my husband, he did know what a patent was. In fact, unbeknownst to me, he had been named as an inventor on a patent application. And he's like, no.
Wow, very modest.
He didn't tell me about it or anything. He's, no, I know what this is. This is a patent, and this is.
That's not the reason.
No, yeah, I wish he would involve me in that discussion. I could have gotten an earlier start on it. But anyway, he's like, no, Bridget, this is a patent. Yeah, they absolutely do tell you how it works, and in exchange, you get some rights in this. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I want to know more about that. I had researched the profession and all the rest of that stuff. And after my little company was acquired by SAP, and I was faced with the decision of going back to a very large company, I thought, hey, wouldn't this be an opportunity to do that thing that I always had in the back of my head and go to law school? I'm going to use my bio money, go to law school. And I had this, again, this misguided idea that you just went to law school, and then when you graduated, you were that person making really important decisions and meeting with CEOs. Like, I didn't know. I had no idea. I didn't really know any lawyers, and certainly no patent lawyers. And so it turns out that is not the case, and that it is very hard to meet with CEOs of companies and get that exposure. So I went through my career always thinking, oh, it's too bad I didn't really get to be at the startup again and be in the room where it happens and making those deals with SAP. And then all of a sudden, this opportunity just came across my desk of, hey, you could be the head of IP at Relativity Space. And I was like, I could be the head of IP at a startup. The whole reason that I became a patent lawyer, it struck me that those types of opportunities just don't come across your desk very often within a lifetime. And so I took it. And I'm glad that I took it, because it really was everything that I hoped that it could be. And it's like the culmination of my career, of like where it's always been headed and what I always wanted to do.
Why were they interested in a head of IP at that point? And why did they think they would convince you to come and join them?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. I wasn't involved in the decision. And I honestly never really went back and asked my GC at the time where that came from. But I just basically think it was untenable for our commercial lawyer to do his full-time job of negotiating contracts plus the full-time job of being in charge of IP, which he was doing up until that time. It was our GC and him, and then a government contracts lawyer. And gosh, I am in awe of that guy, that he was able to do it for as long as he did. He really deserves a medal, and now it's on the record. But yeah, I know a lot of people applied for my role. I don't know what they saw in me, but my GC just said that I had a lot of enthusiasm, and I did. My gosh, I studied really hard, and I put together this amazing pitch of, this is what I see as the vision for the IP department. And obviously it resonated with somebody, because I ended up getting the role.
It's interesting because you hear about some startups and the first attorney that they bring in is a patent attorney. But then you hear the opposite, which is they don't start thinking about IP or patents until they're about to go IPO, and then they go try to buy some up. Now, from where you sit, any advice for maybe a CEO listening to this, or somebody else saying, like, when is the right time to start bring somebody in-house to strategically think about our whole IP program?
Oh boy, it is such a bespoke decision to so many companies, because when I was hiring my first direct report, I was talking to all kinds of different people, some who had never been in-house counsel, some who were in-house counsel. And I remember talking to one who said, I'm in-house at a company, and we have, I think I had misheard him as saying like 2,000 people. And in fact, he said 24 people. And so he was so yeah, I thought, oh, wow, 2,000, boy, that's really something. He'll be able to really hit the ground running. And yeah, he'd actually said 24, and that he was one of several IP attorneys at that company. And so I thought, wow, I think when I joined Relativity, we were maybe 700 or 800 people. So it was already pretty mature and had gone through several funding rounds. So it was already fairly mature by that time. But you know what? I don't know as if there's ever really a right time. It's probably just when it becomes completely untenable for the GC or commercial lawyer, whoever's handling that role, to be able to manage it in-house in addition to all their other roles.
So can you share, I guess you're stepping in the role, you're saying you're being brought on as the head of IP. What do you do next?
So I've been here at Relativity Space, which is, just for the listeners who don't know, it is a rocket company. So we build and launch payloads into outer space. And we did our very first successful test of a rocket back in March of 2023. Its name was Terran 1. And my kid's picture was on Terran 1 when it went to outer
wow.
space. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. So I
A
truly
nice
am
perk.
yeah, it's a weird but nice perk. Yeah. So when I was interviewing for the company, I put together a 5-year plan. It was just based on vibes. I didn't have really any insight into what their existing IP program. I just guessed what I thought it might look like. And often, every once in a while, I go back and I look at that deck that I prepared for my interview, and I was actually struck by how right I got it. And I can very, very clearly remember walking in on my very first day, and I was like, we have this cafe area back in our original headquarters. And I remember looking out into the factory, and I saw these amazing 3D printers. Like, that's a big reason why I work here, is because I was really struck by the 3D printers. They're some of the largest ones in the whole world. And I think we have more 3D printers than just about anyone. I'm looking at these 3D printers, and I'm looking at a half-built Terran 1. And I was thinking, oh my God, these people just built a rocket out of dust and wires. They built a rocket out of dust and wires. Like, really let that sink in. And thinking, wow, what are the next steps in terms of capturing all that innovation that has just passed before me, right? That they're already almost done with this rocket, and none of that is captured. And how do I capture that really, really efficiently and effectively? And one of the big things that wasn't in my original 5-year plan, is it possible to do like a trade secret registry? I've never really seen anything like it, certainly not in any of my 14 years of counseling clients before. But would that be a really good, effective way of just capturing large amounts of IP and getting it cast into concrete in a very fast, cost-effective way? And so that, and at Relativity, when you're like a scrappy startup, they're like, why not? You tell us. And they gave me a lot of deference in that. And so that was one of the big things that stood out was, wow, there is a lot of innovation here. It's turning dust and wires into rockets, and I got to capture it fast. And it seemed to me that, given the increasing prominence of trade secrets, it seemed like the right time and try a new way of doing it.
Yes. So essentially, you spent most of your career focused on patents.
Yeah.
When you arrived to Relativity Space, you said, no, maybe trade secrets is the right answer.
Yeah.
Can you share some of your thinking, I guess, what led you to decide
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. And just to be clear, I didn't entirely eschew patents. They're not as prominent, I would say, in the launch vehicle environment than they are in other very public facing technologies like medical devices or even automobiles, for that matter, where they just put these things into the stream of commerce, and your competitors can disassemble them and however they want. So obviously in that environment, patents remain and are going to continue to remain important for a very long time. A rocket is somewhat exposed, but not to the same extent that an automobile is. And so I had some luxury in deciding, this is going to be a very exposed thing, this is not going to be a very exposed thing. And thinking, yeah, so what does a trade secret program look like in an aerospace environment? So that kind of unique atmosphere, especially overlaid with the international traffic in arms regulations, so what's called ITAR, which also control like the type of information that you can patent and put into the stream of commerce and export to other countries, definitely played a role in all of that, and thinking about what a comprehensive IP program would look like for a rocket company.
Actually, I recently was the chief IP counsel. He goes, people just throw things out like only trade secrets. Trade secrets, the answer, kind of very complex answer, but you have to kind of really think through what your company is doing and why. Obviously, if something's going to be public or you could reverse engineer it, it's not a good candidate for trade secret. I guess what were complications as you were thinking that through about in terms of, is this really the right path for trade secrets or patents, and setting that up within the company where you're trying to now educate everybody about these two very important things, and trade secrets, obviously, there's not a lot of room for error.
They're not. And one thing that I will definitely tell you, I always come prepared, Eli. One of the things I did is thinking back to the early days of when I was setting up this program. And I thought, boy, is there really so little information about this, or was I just making that up? So I did a Google search, And I looked up patent strategy, right? So I think I looked up the phrase patent strategy, and there are 151,000 results in Google. And then I repeated it for trade secret strategy. There are 2,850. So there's just not a lot out there. And so it was somewhat of a leap of faith and learning along the way and doing a lot of research about what a trade secret strategy could look like for Relativity Space. And then, yeah, as you said, just the balancing and deciding how to divide up. Where do you really lean into patents? Where do you really lean into trade secrets? And another thing that I was thinking about ahead of today was our core values. So our core values at Relativity are audacity, relentlessness, wonder, and humanity. And I always try and bring those back when I do presentations to the executive team, just to give them that comfort level. None of them takes precedence over the other. And one of the things that was really resonating with me when I joined initially, and I was hearing the executives express what's keeping them up at night, what are they worrying about, or what I think is going really well. And I learned that the company has just these really audacious goals for the future and really audacious goals for executing on those goals. Yeah, just the timelines are so fast and the goals are so lofty. And all the business units work really hard to deliver on these goals and timelines, and legal and IP is no exception. And although everyone on this podcast understands, of course, that patents are not a guarantor or a license to a clear path forward, one of the reasons that you'll very frequently hear that that companies obtain patents is to increase the likelihood of freedom to operate or freedom of action, like freedom that you want to do in the future, even if you're not directly on that path right now. And that was definitely, I saw a concept that resonated with leadership because it aligns with our value of audacity, right? Having that freedom of action and freedom to operate aligns with their goals and their core values. And another thing that I did notice, and I was really excited about, is that they're really into celebrating technological achievements and sharing them with humanity and expanding the possibilities of human experience in this world and to Mars and who knows what else. And like I said, humanity is one of our core values. And at bottom, that's what patents are about. They're about promoting the progress of useful arts for humanity. And so both of those, I was like, hey, can I lean into this? I think this would improve our chances of freedom to operate. I think that this would be a really great, neat way to celebrate a pretty badass team. And they're like, yes, I hear that. Yes, we lean into trade secrets, absolutely, but patents are an important part of our company just because they're important parts of our core values.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my own practice, I'm a patent prosecution attorney, but the time I end up talking about trade secrets to clients is when somebody on their business team or their engineering team says, well, why can't we just get a trade secret on it? And I think a lot of times the discussion leads into, well, actually, that's not an option for whatever reason. What advice would you give if, let's say, somebody was in your position, they're doing a similar Google search, and they're like, all right, I think there is a place for a serious trade secrets program within our company. What are the next steps? How do you set something up that kind of gives you the confidence?
That's right. And I don't think, so there's a couple parts to that. And there are some easy low-hanging fruits that you can do. And then there are some harder things, but none of them are really hard. And so the advice that I would give is just think about the risk factors facing your company. And like if you're at a startup, some of the risk factors that may be facing you are like employee mobility and turnover, right? That's pretty common among startups now. It could be a really bottlenecked or constrained workforce. Often startups are seizing on this really new emerging technology or capability, and there's not that many people in the world or other companies that are in this space too. And so you're all grabbing for a really small slice of pie in terms of like your workforce. Other things are going to be constrained supply chains, right? And so supply and vendors. And probably another one of them is just this kind of demand among the public, among the press, among investors to like, it's not okay to just give us assurance that this problem is being handled. Like they want to see your factory. They want to see it. They want to see proof. They want to talk about it on social media. There's just this sort of entitlement among consumers of information now that oversharing is almost the norm. And so these are very common things that face them. So you can think about your risk vectors. Okay, so if you're thinking about employee mobility, is it time to think about your onboarding processes, your offboarding processes, your educational or touch points during ongoing employment? So all of those periods, you can think about that. You can think about revisiting your vendor documents and thinking, what does your vendor environment look like? If it is a really constrained vendor environment, are they allowing people to walk their factory floors? And are those people your competitors? And is your equipment going to be out on the factory floor while they are? So that's another risk factor to think of. And then you think about just if there is an insight into your factory that people wouldn't get, if there weren't this social media, if that didn't exist, what's being exposed there? And so you think about all those risk factors and then you come up with solutions for them. And it's just an opportunity to think really creatively because there's no right answer. It's just thinking about risks and thinking about creative ways to fix them. And an out there thing, I don't know, it's really out there. We're not the first company to do it, is to have a trade secret registry that allows you to internally register things that are important to your company.
So that's good advice. I guess that's a good way to keep track of your trade secrets is to have a registry. But I would think you would need something like that to make sure you're maintaining them. Isn't that...
You would think so. You would think so. But when I was researching this as an option, or what does this look like for a mature company? Because I've counseled a lot of clients and I don't recall ever, seeing one or hearing about what their program looks like. And it could be just because they keep it really under lock and key. And honestly, like I do a lot of speaking on trade secret programs right now. And a lot of times I get a lot of pushback and reluctance from other IP counsel out there who are saying like, I don't know, Bridget, I'm just so worried that if I leave something out of the list, that is going to be seen as the thing that tanks my litigation. So I'm more reluctant to do anything. I don't want to even start to put together an inventory of my trade secrets because if I leave something out, the risk is just too high. And that's not what I'm doing, but that is a really common worldview. And so you would be shocked, Eli, by the number of people that actually don't have a really good understanding or documentation of their trade secrets because of this sort of latent fear.
So what is your response to that fear?
So first of all, I have many thoughts on this.
Yeah.
But yeah, copy, as they say in aerospace, like I hear you, but on the same token, and my DMs are always open on LinkedIn. Like I actually do read them and I respond to them. I invite anybody to show me a case where the existence of a trade secret list and the failure to make that list comprehensive was the reason a company lost a misappropriation lawsuit. Because I really want to see that case because I want to stress test my program against it. And I haven't found it yet. It's just this sort of belief that people have that there is a case, but nobody has been able to show it to me yet. So I want to see it, and the DM lines are now open. But more importantly, I really don't think that a judge and jury is expecting you to document every single trade secret perfectly. A registry is not a list. It's not an inventory. It's not this exhaustive inventory. It's not an exhaustive list, and it doesn't need to be. Think of it like an internal patent system. You don't file patents on every single invention your company comes up with. You're like, oh, well, I can't patent everything, so therefore I should patent nothing. That's just a silly worldview. And for the same reason, just because you don't document every single trade secret is not the reason to not document anything.
I'm guessing the feeling is, if you don't put anything on paper, then you're theoretically imagining, well, I can get very creative if I need to come up that we had some kind of trade secrets. And if you're really stretching maybe at that point, it would make it more difficult if you had a list of kind of to compare to.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you
And
see?
that's why this isn't a list. It's more like registering information that is important to the company economically and being able to think in an environment. I think it's really important in an environment where there is employee mobility and turnover. And when that person leaves, are you going to lose that sort of like institutional knowledge they had about what they had come up with, where it's stored, who was working on it? Where are the development efforts going? Why is it economically important to the company? Or is it all going to be gone? I think that the value of having that institutional knowledge outweighs any risk of writing it down. And it really does pay dividends because then when somebody leaves the company, you have these really great insights into what it was that they're working on and what the risk vectors are to it after they leave.
So I've read way, way, way less trade secret decisions than you have, but a lot of them seem to hinge on, was it really maintained as a trade secret, right? And it's sometimes a very, at least maybe seems almost silly. Did this number of employees have access to it? Did they take it home or whatever? On a practical basis, once you add something to registry, how do you make sure then that it's maintained as a trade secret?
Yeah, so those are, you absolutely hit the nail on the head, Eli. Those are called your reasonable measures. It's part of the definition of the statutory definition of a trade secret in most states, I think all states, and the DTSA, the Defend Trade Secrets Act. Yeah, so you have to take reasonable measures to ensure that these stay secret. And there is no magic formula as to what is reasonable under the circumstances. And that's why trade secret cases are expensive, just like any litigation is expensive. That's one of the things that they'll inevitably fight over. And nobody is holding you to a standard of perfection. It is, again, it's just being reasonable. And so it's just trying to show that you take things seriously and you're trying to do a good job. And what that means for different companies and different, like what that means for Apple computers is very different than that means for a 12-person startup that's just doing their best, where you maybe have one lawyer that works for the whole company. And if that lawyer shows that they're working hard and they really care and they're creating like this understanding among the company about what they're supposed to do with confidential information, like I think they're doing a great job. So yeah, that's it. That's reasonable measures. And I wish that I could give a generic answer that was good for everybody, but there isn't one. They're very bespoke to everybody.
No, but on a practical level, I think you're talking about training. But is there anything you recommend setting any kind of rules, or is that kind of risky on its own if you set internal rules?
There's so many things that you can do. And you know what, Eli, it depends how much that information is worth to your company and really asking the hard question to your stakeholders. Okay, so what would really cause you to lose sleep at night if I told you that an employee left with 1,000 files and got on a plane and we never saw that person again? And there'll probably be a really small list of stuff that really matters to them. And that's where you can focus a lot more attention. And that could involve things like the idea of physical security measures. You could do badge access control to certain rooms where things are stored. It could be individualized training. There's just so many different things that you can do. And again, it's just a matter of thinking creatively and just having a mass of stuff that shows like this is something that's important to me and I take it seriously. And that's a reasonable measure.
You've been obviously a leader in talking and writing about this, setting up programs. And I'm sure a lot of people heard you who have their companies' IP programs, let's say, are primarily patents and trademarks. And they're like, all right, Bridget, I'm in. I hear what you're saying when you set up a trade secrets program, a registry, start educating everybody. But any advice about being realistic about whether a company is actually going to wrongly think it has trade secrets when the whole culture does not align with that for the reasons you described?
You know what? In my view, I take a very maybe Pollyannish view of it. It's never too late. It is never too late to start a trade secret program because maybe you did things not as well as you could have in the past. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can do it well going forward. And you can keep trying and keep building and keep making it better. And that's what's so great about trade secrets as opposed to patents, where when you file a patent, it's kind of locked in stone and that's what you have to work with until the end of time. Not true of trade secrets. That is not true of trade secrets. And you can just keep building and building upon it. Yes, you may not have the culture now, but it is not impossible to build a culture, and you can do that incrementally. You don't have to stop everything that you're doing and devote all of your attention to this. Instead, you can say, hey, this week I'm going to focus on improving my onboarding process. This week I'm going to focus on improving my offboarding process. This week I'm going to focus on employee education. You can do this piecemeal over time, and by the end of the year, you have a pretty good trade secret program, I should think.
So your advice isn't to forget trade secrets exist. It's to try to build a meaningful trade secrets program.
It is. I think that one can't really put their head in the sand anymore. Perhaps in the past, there may have been that perception. Trade secrets were somewhat of an outlier in the IP community. I was a patent attorney. I did a lot of client counseling. And one of the things that I don't think I ever asked a client, and I wish I would have now in retrospect, I thought, oh boy, in terms of missed opportunities, that's a big one, is we would talk about, we file our patent and we're like, we're going to leave this out. We're going to include this. This is important. We're not going to file it. We would inevitably say, we'll just keep that a trade secret. And everyone would be like, oh, yes, we're going to keep this a trade secret. And I never asked the follow-up question. And what does that look like for you? What does that look like for your company? What are the next steps for protecting the trade secret? Because chances are they probably would have said it meant not filing a patent. and that would have been it. But my gosh, what was it, last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, another $600 million trade secret judgment? Those used to be reserved only for patent cases, and now they're becoming the norm among trade secrets. So I really don't think that answer that I'm protecting a trade secret by not filing a patent on it is the right answer. Like it needs to be taken just as seriously as you would a patent.
I've seen situations where some companies are like, we have trade secrets, but they have no awareness of what a trade secret is or what it actually requires. And after the fact, because they want to find some way, no, people cannot just copy what we're doing or have access to what we're doing, but it's after the fact.
It is. And it's one of the easiest things, in my view, that you can do as head of IP is to go around to the different business units. There's probably going to be a relatively small number of people who have like the biggest amount of insights into what is important to the company, what everybody is working on. And just saying, okay, from among those, what really keeps you up at night? And start with those. And then you've done something, and you've done something high impact, and you've done something important because you are protecting what matters most to your employer.
You talked about how Relativity Space industry that it's in kind of lends itself to trade secret protection. You've obviously become a huge champion of trade secrets, but you said there's still room for patents because that kind of aligns with what the company does. But your background actually is protecting patents from the death squad of PTAB. Can you share about your thoughts about how to build your patent portfolio? How do you think about that these days?
Yeah, that's a great question, because my answer would be a lot different if I often think about this, and just because, like I said, I love being an IP lawyer, and I love thinking about what would my job look like if I worked somewhere else, or what problems are they facing? And I just think about externally what other people's jobs look like. So my answer would be a lot different if I were in another industry, and I've thought about that a lot. But one of the things that I can say that since I joined Relativity, it's like a mindset shift that I've had, and that I think can work for really any company. I think this is agnostic to the technological environment. I used to think of the patent and trade secret balance as two circles next to each other, if you could, the Venn diagram, right? They don't intersect, it's patents or trade secrets. And I've shifted that worldview. And now what I think of is defining what your trade secrets are as like this overarching class of information with many vectors all pointing into it, whether it's going to be like unique data sets or your business strategy or these vendors for this technology. Like all of that is pointing into this class of information. From there, you can define using the kind of classic definitions of when to file a patent, which might be they're necessary to support a standard, or they are very exposed in the supply chain, or this is something that you need to license to a vendor. There's very classic reasons to file patents. And you can then, once you've identified your trade secret, carve out from that as a subset the information that should be patented for a reason that supports your business goals. What that is probably going to be very different, or at least the number of them will be very different from industry to industry, but there's still like a limited number of factors that go into that calculus that are true across many different industries. Just in aerospace, it's probably smaller than it is in, say, semiconductor chips or automobiles.
The number, because that's a kind of a big topic of discussion, and I don't think anybody has a good answer for that. Everybody's trying to find some kind of justification for their patent portfolio, for their patent portfolio budget and all that. And in some ways it seems random. Like, how do you think about that? How do you think about what is the number for a company?
Yeah. And it's that, oh my gosh, such a hard question. And I know it's been one thing. I really listen to my executive team, and to the extent that I don't push back on them or they'll suggest something to, like, I will find a way to make that work. If my GC asks me to do something, I will find a way to make that work where maybe she's not 100% happy, or maybe I'm not 100% happy, but we'll reach a medium where we're both okay. And one of the things that I have definitely pushed back on is like the idea of setting a number of patents as the measure of success for our IP program, and that increasing it every year shows increasing success, because our business goals could change from year to year, and investment in patents may not make sense one year, while a lot of investment in patents might make sense another year. And so I don't want to set myself up for failure by failing to meet a metric that's not actually in service to my company. And so I tend to not look at, and maybe I will someday, but at least for now, it is not, no, a measure of my success, and I have ones that are more quantifiable, but it is just really how well is my executive team sleeping at night, and not expressing concerns about, are we covered? Are we okay? Are we protected? And when I don't get those questions, like, I know I've succeeded. At the end of the day, it's really, hey, I've spoken to all of the business leaders, all of the technical business heads about what is keeping them up at night. And we understand what that is. We being the royal we of the IP department, we understand what that is. We understand who's working on them, why they're novel to our company, why it's economically important, where the information is stored, and who's ever been associated with it. And boy, oh boy, does that give them a lot of peace of mind. So just being able to say, like, the stuff that matters to the company most is meaningfully documented, I think. And whether that is through patents or trade secrets is a good measure of success.
You identify what needs patent protection, and as long as you have the patent protection, then I guess
that's
right.
Right.
The goal of that, yeah. But one thing you mentioned, obviously, it's an understatement to say that a patent doesn't guarantee you perfect protection. I hear, some companies say these are strategic patents we're going to invest in, but those things never seem to stick out as a portfolio grows. I guess, what is your perspective on it?
I think I understand the question, and it's a good one. When you're at a startup like Relativity, business goals change over time, and what is important to you even 8 months ago and maybe seen as like very important is not as important, because something will change, and that change is the only constant. Yeah. It really depends on the industry. In aerospace, I would say, or at least in the launch vehicle aspect of aerospace, probably the driver of success, the ultimate driver of success is, can you get a payload to outer space? and not there is no patent. There may be a patent that could guarantee that because it's so good at preserving your freedom to operate or something like that, but that's probably not the case. And yeah, maybe I have a little bit more luxury in my industry than others do.
That makes sense. It's not as critical. I guess you spend a lot of time, PTAB world, for somebody who they want to get a patents that do provide them as much protection as possible. Any advice there about what they can do from a surviving the PTAB perspective?
That's a really, really hard question. And I've thought about that a lot. And that my experience at the PTAB did affect me a lot. And I think that there can be, and it's important to get it right. It is so important to get it right. And I wish that there were a way. I would love to be able to profess or tell a client that my experience gave me a special skill in crafting a PTAB proof or litigation proof claim. And perhaps there are lawyers out there that can claim a measure of success that exceeds that of the rest of the industry. But at least speaking on behalf of myself, I know that if I said it, it wouldn't be true. And I'm probably one of the more experienced PTAB practitioners in the country. And that's probably because despite the efforts of leadership to add certainty and reliability to the PTAB process, which is certainly a noble goal, it remains an inherently uncertain and unpredictable process. All litigations are, but patent litigation may be doubly so because they're stacked now, right? There's the PTAB part stacked on litigation. And it is really difficult to craft a claim that survives both. Yeah. And what the secret is, I wish I knew it.
So I guess one issue with the PTAB, I guess a former guest on the Clause 8, Professor Yelderman, he was a professor at the time, he did a study, and that prior art that's applied at the PTAB that invalidates patents is a hidden prior art. There's no reasonable way that you could have found that when you're filing the patent application. But is there any commonalities that you see among the patents that kind of, you said you were able to protect the first patents from patent owners. Is there any commonalities that you see among patents that do survive? Or is it really a crapshoot?
No. And there were some times that I think I could get to the point where I could predict, I don't think that this one will ultimately survive just because it's not long enough. I think the ones that I actually did win were quite short claims. So, who's to say? But I think I would agree with that assessment in that it's economically impossible. It would be such an expensive patent to do a scorched earth patentability search, right? And you end up with all of these references. You end up with so many references, and you submit them to the patent office, and the patent examiner comes to the conclusion, looks at them, and comes to the conclusion that this invention is patentable. And there's nothing on the record that indicates that while they may, this is the best case scenario, that you did actually find all of the most relevant references. I don't know that has ever happened, but let's assume that you did, right? But there will be no evidence on the record that the examiner specifically considered the combination of reference A or reference B, right? Because they just say that I considered these references, but not a combination of them. And so it's presented as a new combination that hasn't been considered before, along with some supporting evidence from an expert. And at this point, then it's a judgment call of two, maybe even not even all three APJs, but two of the three APJs do not think that the invention is patentable over that combination. And again, one examiner did. So at some points, it's just reduced to a judgment call. And that's why I had said before that it's somewhat of an inherently uncertain and unpredictable process when there is just that room for a judgment call. It's difficult. It definitely puts patent owners in a tough spot. It definitely affected me and affected my practice. And I think really hard about my patent claims before I file them.
What do you think about when you're thinking about these days you said you think about your patent claims when you file them?
Yeah. So it really is a lot of things. And I do actually look really hard at my patent claims. maybe should delegate it more to my outside counsel, but I just can't let it go. So I do actually review them. And I think about things like, is there something I learned at the PTAB where this went wrong and I wish we had done it differently?
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So just here's a funny thing, and you might be able to see it in my portfolios. I love means plus function claims. I do. Like way more than I should. I'm probably one of the only patent attorneys left that actually likes them. I like them for a number of reasons, but when you think about them like really methodically and strategically and write claims with the belief and knowledge that it is going to be entitled to 112 paragraph 6 protection, or whatever it's called now. I'm old. That's why I call it 112 paragraph 6. When it's entitled to that claim construction and walking in with the full expectation, I think it can actually be quite a powerful claim. And so I'm always asking my outside counsel, hey, I noticed here this might be an opportunity to write and beef up your description of this structure and function, and really beefing this up to maybe preserve the opportunity to do 112 paragraph 6 down the road, because actually I've had quite a good deal of success preserving the patentability of 112 paragraph 6 claims before the PTAB. I don't know why, but I have. And it's the only ones that I didn't have as great success is when they were given 112 paragraph 6 construction, like a term that was not means for, but rather like a nonce word. It was just written with that. So not the full expectation that they would be given such a construction. So that was just an example. You'll see that I have a lot of 112 paragraph 6 type description supports in my applications. I just really like that. But there's also just like opportunities to make claims longer, have very varied scope. I definitely am not of the view that you should just have the product, the process, and the CRM claim that are just 3 different versions of exactly the same thing. Because boy, oh boy, that is like handing a petitioner a gift on a silver platter, because they don't have to redo all of the arguments. They just say, seeking one. And they don't have to use any more they don't have to use any more word count.
We talked how you put together this deck before you stepped into the role of head of IP, and you've been actually able to follow it. Obviously, you've had to lay out a whole trade secrets program, all that. Anything else that stands out from your experience that kind of you learned along the way about starting in the role as head of IP that you maybe surprised you?
Yes. So, okay. So lessons learned, and surprises. I wouldn't say that there were a lot of surprises. Like, again, I'm actually somewhat stunned when I put together an idea of what an IP program would look like for a startup, not for my company, not actually knowing anything about what their existing program looked like, and how right it was, and how closely I'm able to stick to my projection of what I thought it would look like. So to that extent, I don't think there are many surprises. And maybe that's because I've worked with clients in startup environments in client counseling for a long time. But the lessons were mainly around efficiency and especially talking to varied audiences. When you live in an IP bubble, which I probably did to some extent, where I'm talking about 112 paragraph 6 and everyone is like, oh yeah, of course, I know what you mean, right? And if you said that to your CTO, they would look at you like you had 4 eyes or something like that. I found that sometimes I definitely would lose sight of that many people, many really smart, on it, just incredibly savvy people, and even top executives have very different expectations about what patents are and what they can do. And so I think the single most impactful thing you can just ask somebody is not in terms of just, what do you think of this nitty gritty patent stuff, but rather broader strokes of like, what is keeping you up at night? And then propose a way to be of service to them, to reduce their stress level. And as you walk around the factory and meet different people, that what is keeping you up at night and how you can be of service to them is going to look very different. And ultimately, that's going to make you a really strong, impactful IP counselor, as if they have problems that relate to your domain and you can solve them. And that is helping make their jobs easier. is setting you up for success. The other big thing that I learned in terms of just like improving my communication that I think is applicable to almost anybody. And it just became so much more crystallized when I went in-house. And my GC, my current GC, likes to call this concept "so what," and that sounds glib, but it's not glib at all once you understand it. And it means that when you're giving someone information, make sure that they don't mentally need to ask themselves, "So what?" You answer it for them before they've even asked it. You tell them, why does this information that I am sending, why does this email matter to you? Why are you on this email? What exactly do I need from you? When exactly do I need it? And you reduce the reader's mental load as much as possible so that it becomes very clear to them about like why you're working on is important, why it's important to them, and what you need from them to help them make decisions very quickly and easily. And like I said, I don't think this advice is cabined to working within a company. So I was thinking of an analogy of this, and I got an email the other day that was titled "Client Alert" was what it was on there. And then there was like the subject. And I read it and it was telling me about a recent change in PTAB procedures. And it was like a full page long. It was really long. And I thought, I wonder why they called this an alert, because alert implies that it's something very important. So why is this an alert? Why was this change as the PTAB important to me as a client? And why did they send it to me if I don't have any PTAB cases with them? So what did they want me to do with this knowledge? And it added to my mental load. It didn't reduce it. And if law firms would also think about their client communications through this lens of "so what," and just really sharpening up what information you are providing to the person and what you need from them, it just would have made it a lot clearer. So what? Learn it, live it, love it. It definitely works for me.
No, that's great advice for in-house and outside counsel. I mean, your first point about the in-house, because especially for IP, in-house IP counsel, a lot of times the concern is that IP counsel interact with anybody within the company. There might be taking them away from doing something what's truly core and important to the company. And your approach is really, how can I help them instead of how can they help me do IP stuff?
It is, you know what? It is a definitely of service to my executives and to my company and to the entry-level technicians. I am here to serve them and to make their jobs easier. And I just like to go around and talk to them and hear about like what's keeping them up and how can I help you do your job more smoothly? Because at the end of the day, like anything that I can do to get that rocket up is in service of our company's audacious goals.
A few final questions. There's probably somebody out there will be listening to it, maybe a junior associate being assigned their first PTAB case, or a very experienced PTAB practitioner, and they listen to this. I want to be Bridget. That's what I wanted to do my whole career. Be head of IP at a company, set the strategy, do all that. Any advice about setting up yourself for that?
Yeah, it's make a series of bad career choices. No, I'm joking. I definitely take risks. Some of them pay off and some of them don't. One of the things that has stood out to me as being a consistently good decision that I make was joining a small number of professional organizations and really leaning into them, period. That is just such good career advice. And it's advice that I got early on and it's stuff that I really embraced. And I've had a really great and fulfilling career for sure. But I got to tell you, I have met the most extraordinary people and had the most extraordinary experiences and done cool things because of my involvement in professional organizations. And I personally volunteer significantly with AIPLA, which is the American IP Law Association. I volunteer with CHIPS, which is Chiefs of Intellectual Property for Women in IP Law. But there's many out there. I'm a member of ABA section of IP Law. I used to volunteer more with them. I don't as much now just because I'm resource constrained. But there's like
Even you.
technical and non-legal organizations, and you just pick one and lean into it. And like, I get it. Do I ever get it? It is so hard to bill and to volunteer and to stretch yourself so thin. Like, I hear you. I grok you. I have been there. The way I look at it is just, I want to be of service to the next Bridget. Whether people know it or not, there's a crisis in our profession. Have you looked at the numbers? They're terrible. There's no one stepping up to take my place when I retire. And that's bad. And I want to change that. And so, join a professional organization, lean in, do outreach, tell people about what you do, help them care about IP, and promote the progress, right? It's right there in the Constitution, and make a lasting impact. And I promise you, it will be a really great thing. Like, you will meet somebody that'll change your life by doing it.
This is great advice and a great end to our conversation. Bridget, thank you so much for joining Clause 8.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget that new episodes of Clause 8 come out every 2 weeks, so be sure not to miss it by subscribing at clause8podcast.com.